running up too much debt, having an entitlement system that was out of control, and also a foreign policy that would lead us to do more things overseas than we should be doing. And we've gotten ourselves into this mess because I think we have been too careless. The people have been careless. Our representatives in Congress have been careless, and careless in the sense that we have not taken the oath of office seriously. I believe that most of our problems have come because we have violated the Constitution, and we could solve almost all our problems if we would only send people to Washington who took the oath of office seriously and obeyed the Constitution. Is over $1 trillion every year, $1.4, $1.5 trillion a year. Now, there's no serious attempt in Washington, and quite frankly, if you listen to the other candidates, there's no serious attempt to cut spending. I believe if you want to get our house in order, our country back on track again, we have to cut spending, so I have proposed to cut $1 trillion out of the budget in 1 year. No, I've heard they were going to cutting spending, and Congress was lax. They turned it over to the super committee, and they didn't do a very good job. So there's some automatic cuts of over $1 trillion starting in the year 2013 and stretching out over a 10-year period, and they're going to cut $1 trillion out of a $10 trillion proposed increase. That is not a decrease. That's $100 billion a year over a 10-year period. We spend $100 billion in debt every single month. That's how serious it is. And we have a chairman of the Federal Reserve Board who has promised that he would use your dollars to bail out all of Europe who bought too much Greek debt, and they're in trouble, and he's promised to bail them out. That is why I emphasize the Federal Reserve. We have to get control of the Federal Reserve. We have to get control of our money. We need sound money, and we should never allow an organization like the Federal Reserve. They created in the midst of the big bailouts, $15 trillion they churned. Congress was derelict in their duty. They spent $1 trillion. But the Federal Reserve, 15 trillion, and they did it in secrecy, and they resent it when I asked questions and said, we need to audit you and find out what you're doing and who you're bailing out and who are the And this is certainly where we've made a lot of progress in bringing attention to the American people the seriousness of the monetary system. The Federal Reserve has been around for 100 years. It's only been in the last 3 or 4 years that it's gotten its attention that it deserves. So I will continue on that. I do not believe we can have a healthy economy with unhealthy money, and therefore we have to do something. The first thing we should do is have a thorough audit of the Fed and make sure they're actually holding the gold they claim they're holding. The reason the Federal Reserve is so important is it generates big government. The bigger the government, the smaller our liberties. Our government is way too big. That is why I believe that we're at a point now where our liberties have been severely eroded, and we need to curtail that trend. We have various pieces of legislation that have been very abusive to our liberties. You take the Patriot Act, which was passed in 2001. The Patriot Act sounds wonderful, but if it had been called what it really was, repeal the Fourth Amendment Act, it wouldn't have been passed, and it ought to be repealed, to tell you the truth. Just recently, the National Defense Authorization Act was passed. Buried in that provision was a very, very serious provision that gives the president now the authority to use the Army to arrest any American citizen, deny him a trial, deny him a lawyer, and put him in prison indefinitely. That is not what America is all about. Now, the one thing that is a responsibility of the federal government is our defense. Defense is very, very important. That is not a state function. And having had the experience being in the military and on international relations. This is a big concern to me because we don't obey the Constitution. We're in too many wars. We don't know why we're in these wars. We don't seem to ever end them. This problem could have been prevented by only going to war with a full declaration of war when necessary, fight it, win it, and get it over with and come home. But we're engaged now around the world. We have 900 bases, 130 countries, and great countries and great empires always come down not for military reasons. We didn't have to fight the Soviet. When I was called to duty in the 60s, they had 30,000 nuclear weapons, and I was called up over the Cuban crisis. But great empires usually bankrupt themselves, and that is what we're doing to ourselves. We are a greater threat fiscally than we are from any outside threat. We have more weaponry than all the other countries put together. Nobody's going to invade us. We have to look to ourselves for our safety and our security because we have gone through a terrible financial crisis these last couple of years, especially 7 and 8 and even 09. But it's not over. It's just temporary. Europe is going down. Bernanke has guaranteed we'd bail them out. So the financial crisis is worldwide because they had believed this fiction that you can create wealth out of a printing press. You can't. You only create work by hard work and savings. That is the way you create wealth. To undermine that. The Federal Reserve keeps interest rates down to 0%, 1%. So why save? People who want to take care of themselves and have a CD, they make no interest. Who gets the big loans at 0% or 1%? The big banks, and they're back on their feet again. They're the ones who got bailed out, but they were the ones who were making all the money when the bubble was being blown out. And then when the crisis comes, they say, well, you got to bail them out. They're too big to fail. So they get bailed out. Who got the bad debt? The people got the bad debt. And the people lost their jobs. Then they lost the houses. All these programs were designed to help the poor people. You know, but there is no such thing as free houses and free medical care and free education and free food. There's nothing free. The more you accept that and think that is going to work, the worse the conditions they get. Entitlements are not rights. Rights mean that you have a God-given right to your life, to your liberty. You ought to have a right to keep the fruits of your labor. Not accept what we had in the past, but to improve upon it. We had the greatest example of what a free society was all about. We were the freest, and we had the largest middle class and the most prosperous middle class in the history of the world. But today, the middle class is not the wealthy, it's getting smaller. And our liberties are being diminished. We're 47th in the world for protection of personal privacy and liberty. So it's being undermined. And this is the reason that we have to look to our traditions. I believe the understanding of freedom, if you see it as an individual matter, not a group matter. No group should ever be punished, but no group should get special benefits. If you look at individuals and people honor and respect and know what freedom means, personal habits, personal choices, churches, whatever you think and do as long as you don't hurt people, it should be recognized. That means we don't have to tell people what to do with their freedom, that they can use it themselves, and we shouldn't tell people what to do with their money either. This should bring us all together.